Hello and welcome to Newsmakers for this Wednesday, October 30th, 2024. I'm Louie and thank you for joining us. And with Halloween just one day away, we thought we'd talk about the spooky and unexplainable right here in our own backyard. And to do that, I'm pleased to be joined by ghost guide Daniel from Ghost Walks, which offers guided ghost tours of Niagara on the Lake, Hamilton, and across Southern Ontario. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
It is a very busy time of year for you, so I'm glad you got us some time. Just explain to us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm one of the ghost guides, the manager for the tours that run in Hamilton and Niagara on the Lake. We're very much dedicated to history, but on top of that is the ghost stories themselves, which I personally believe have a connection. Mm-hmm. We can talk about that if you want, but I mean, interesting history, energetic history, and then ghost stories, which this region, Niagara and Hamilton, is just filled with them.
Yeah, we've been talking Niagara on the Lake, Dundas, Hamilton. They're all sold out this week, so if you were looking at going to Ghost Walks website and trying to get one, there's lots of ghost tours offered in November. So if you're still feeling spooky, you personally, when did you first realize that this was something you were passionate about?
Well, definitely, it started with history, although I've had an interest in ghosts for, since I was a child. I grew up in an older historic house and did have experiences when I was a kid. But for me, it was always the history. And the real catalyst for it, I'm not sure if you would have heard of it, but there used to be a house on Hamilton Mountain known as the Bellevue Mansion. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when I first started out, that was, of course, abandoned. And it had this reputation of being the most like Canada's Amityville. It was so haunted, and eventually a bunch of series of events led me from Toronto back to my home in Hamilton and investigating it. And that would be the very first one that kind of kicked off my love of history and ghost stories.
Now, is it safe to, can I call you a paranormal investigator? Would you prefer, is that a title that you'd like, or is it investigator? How would you describe yourself?
No, do not call me that.
Do not call me. I'm surprised you didn't walk off the set there.
I'm gone. No, originally. But the thing is, I never really liked it. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of a shot towards the ghost shows like Ghost Hunters and Adventurers and all those. They're very entertaining, but I know for a fact that a lot of the stuff is made up and faked. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's a big, big moment for everybody.
This is the gotcha moment I was telling you about.
Everybody knows.
So you're talking about those shows where they have the readers and they're walking in and they're scanning the room and they're hearing all the energy here. That's not your style. That's not your forte. No. You don't even believe that.
No, and I'm telling you, I mean, you see it on the TV and stuff happens. It doesn't happen in real life. In real life, an investigation can go weeks and not one thing could occur. But what I realized I loved was the history of the location, because I was kind of like the journalist of the group. So I would collect the stories as well. And when people were telling me their personal experience, I was like, you know what? This is what I want. This is I want to hear every word you got to tell me. Mm-hmm. And that's what led me originally or later on into the tours.
And again, that's a huge part of any investigation, let alone, something like ghosts or history. It's those unexplained connections to people who have an identical story, who have no connection whatsoever. It is that digging, that researching. What is it about that the history part you've mentioned, but what is it about that led you to start this Ghost Walks tour services?
Well, the Bellevue Mansion mostly because of the fact that it had such a vivid ghost story associated with it. And the attempt to prove it to be false, which it was because it was so over the top, it was crazy. It was related to possession and murder and all, and there was no marking of this in any newspaper or anything. Yeah. It was very over the top.
Yeah.
So that kind of started down the road. But for me personally, I get a kick out of knowing that there's energy in a building that can connect you to 100 or 200 years of history. And if it does come out for you in that moment, I just find that to be so interesting and special that you can connect to a historical figure through their energy left in a place.
And I want to go there because energy, or we've heard these words, especially a lot lately. Even I use the word vibes a lot because I always it's that unexplained connection to even a friend or somebody you meet where you're just I can feel like you and I are going to be friends type thing, right? Mm-hmm. To connect that to history, because there's a lot of people who are skeptical about ghost stories and the paranormal and things like that. What would you say to skeptics who don't believe in ghosts at all?
Well, first off, the word vibes wouldn't work well in marketing for a ghost tour. It's great. It's not terrifying. But you're right. You're absolutely right in the sense that energy, vibes. So what I'd say to a skeptic, if they would come to me, I'd say, well, you believe in science stating that everything is made of the same type of vibrating atoms, right? We're all energy. Everything, this table, it's all energy. So the fact that you can state that everything is vibrating energy, is a really hard stretch to state that, you know, through emotional and tragic events where these bursts of emotional energy, could something be left behind? And that usually kind of brings them over a bit. But then that logical brain comes in and tells them, no, it's still not right. Yeah. And then they'll be like, no, I don't believe.
So people on tours, I'm sure people sometimes are brought on tours as a date who may be a skeptic. There's always going to be somebody who gets you there who's super excited about it. And there may sometimes in your tours be those skeptics, and maybe they're vocal. You're full of it. You're full, you know, like, what are you doing? Sure, you paid money to chirp somebody. It's like going to a comedian, right? Just paying to go see a stand-up comedian and chirping them the whole time. You're going because you want to believe. But have you ever had a situation where somebody is just so skeptical? It's just like, guy, I'm just trying to do my job here.
You know, I can happily say never.
Okay.
I will put an asterisk on that because we do the tours in wine country.
Okay. Oh, nice.
Somebody comes a bit wasted, then yes, it might change where they'll become a little bit belligerent. But you know, no, overall, I'll get folks kind of challenging me. But I've been doing this for so long. I know how to handle those things. And the most part, I'll just kind of accept it. But even if they don't like the ghost stories, they don't believe it, they'll still love the history, and we're very charismatic and visual in the way we tell our stories, because we want to, you know, bring people back to that time. And the ghost stories, I find, can be creepy whether you believe in it or not.
Yeah. On that point of the people, what's that moment like when you see someone who it just all comes together there? Because like it's such a medium for you to go in front of people and tell these stories that yes, you're an expert in, but you've told hundreds of times. It's got to be the little light bulb moment where somebody comes in and like really gets it. No, like, is there that moment where you feel like they might have been a skeptic and then they feel like that kind of thing, right? I got it.
If they did, they're not going to admit it in front of the group. I've had folks come up to me after, okay, this is an interesting phenomenon for you. So people will come on the tour and say, no, I don't believe in this stuff at all. It's not true. They'll do the tour, and then they'll be interested. I can tell by their facial expressions. They'll come up to me afterwards, and they'll be like, you know what? When I was a kid, I had this experience. And they'll tell the most insane, over-the-top ghost experience I've heard. I'll give you an example. As a fellow, he grew up in Scotland, I believe. And he was a skeptic, told me straight out to my face, I don't believe in any of this stuff. And then once he was won over by the stories, he comes to me after and says, yeah, when I was a kid, we were renovating our kitchen and the floor was taken out. So it was just the rafters. And I walked in one afternoon to carefully go get a drink from the fridge. And there was a woman standing by the window, floating over one of the open spaces. And I'm like, what? you were a skeptic like 5 seconds ago. You forgot? So yeah, I'm always amazed by it. And that's happened multiple times, which I don't understand it.
Yeah, and like I say, you're on the tour, you're a skeptic to begin with, and then you're, oh yeah, but that thing that happened, that really unexplainable thing that I was a kid, that did remind me. It jogged my memory a little bit there. You mentioned history, you mentioned the ghost stories part of it. That's got to be super fascinating to connect these, like, again, we talked about the investigative part. What do you use as resources? Is it fellow stories, newspaper art? Like, how do you craft your ghost story from history?
It's everything. And on top of that, there's also lots of ghost-related books that have been written over the years that you can, pull from there of the most haunted locations. So if a location is going to be featured, let's say I do a new one, like we just did Dundas starting this year, which was an easy one to set up. My goodness, it's awesome there.
Books and volumes of
that
books.
Is the place. But yeah, if it's a location were to come to me, for example, like we do one at Castle Kilbride up in Baden, I have to be able to look in and look at the history and look at what's happened there to see if there's even a base for it. The history has to have a certain level to it as well, certain events from the past. And then on top of that, yes, I can use my knowledge of investigations to bring in psychics that I know, to bring in investigators on the scientific side, and see what we can stir up and see what we can make happen.
So take us through that. What would a process of bringing a psychic in? What would a psychic tell you? What could they feel? Just again, if I'm a skeptic here, you're telling me that there's a ghost. Okay, prove it. Prove there's a ghost here.
So yeah, if you were to approach me and say, okay, I needed us to investigate the CHCH studios, for example.
Maybe not these brand new studios we find ourselves in, but yeah.
The one connected to the old house?
The old house.
That one, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah,
you never know. You never know.
Or the radio, I used to work at a radio station in St. Catharines on Yates Street. And there's been tons of stories about 12 Yates Street or whatever it is, the old White House there.
I have a big history with that place.
Do you?
One of the things that followed me home once was from the old Marriott House.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, no way. Okay, sorry, I cut you off there. So if I'm curious, like I said, if I'm curious that I think my place is haunted, I call you up. What would your steps be?
So everybody has their own style, but me as a leader in the investigative team, I'll bring in two sides. So you bring in the psychic side, you bring in the scientific side. Scientific sides is all the blinking tools you see in the shows, like the EMF detectors and all that. Psychic side is just psychics with their brains, So you bring them in, and then you kind of like coordinate as much as you can, but you also want them to interact. Even if they're fighting with each other, you want them to kind of come to conclusions, and everybody in the team has to come in cold. That's the most important part. They can't know any information. You got to be able to trust them not to look it up if it's available. So they know nothing when they come in, both sides. Yeah. And then the leader, myself, will know the information, but only share it on an as-needed basis. So then as you're going through the investigation and documenting all you can, these things will start coming out that will relate to the history that only you know, and then you can kind of just push on that as secretly as possible. Yeah. And hopefully in the end, all the recording that's been done around it could prove the person yourself who brought us in that there is something in there.
And so there's got to be times where A, it doesn't work, and B, or the other side, where you feel nothing and they're totally off and you're not connecting on the same page. And then where they're within something that they're so close you can come to an agreement. Is that the two ends of the extreme, and then you try and find something a bit more to one side to really verify it? Or at the end of the day, because of your experience, are you trusting your gut to say, okay, no, I feel something, I know these vibrations that I'm getting, like, because it's your reputation on the line, I want to say, right?
It's that last one. Yeah, you really go with your gut. I mean, you need experience in this. Anybody out there want to be an investigator? First off, I highly don't recommend it. But if you do, you just got to start doing them at homes and then build yourself up until you have that gut feeling, you know you're going in the right direction because you're guiding it, right? But yeah, no, that's the sense of it. So the psychics can come through with information. The scientific side can come through with readings. And if information and readings come from a similar space. Yeah. And some of those readers also now return words and full sentences. So, you can kind of confirm those things together as well.
Yeah. I don't think people appreciate, like, I grew up in Niagara. So I'm aware of its history, notable locations, Niagara on the Lake, right? But I really don't think people in the Golden Horseshoe appreciate just how many haunted avenues they have for them to go check out. We really are lucky as a ghost hunter a ghost guide. We are lucky to know that there is so much rich history and these stories are worth telling.
100%. And you just mentioned Niagara. Not to take anything away from Hamilton. That's my home. I was born and raised. Tons of ghost stories. But, I mean, Niagara is just a different animal for Canada in general because of the War of 1812. So the massive war fought on Canadian soil, focused in on that region. Niagara on the Lake, where we do our one tour, Canada's most haunted town, hands down, because of that history. The energy is definitely more raised there, and the loyalists coming in, building that area first, and having to deal with the most violent of surroundings just adds to it.
Yeah, I mean, I can picture, driving down there a few weekends ago, and you got the main street, and then you got the fort, which is right there. You got the Navy base, which is right there. Let's get a little bit more into Niagara on the Lake. What is one of your favorite spots in the town, and give us a good story about it.
Okay. As for most interesting, I'll start with, and I'll get most haunted. So most interesting is there's this, it's currently abandoned. It was originally the Trisha Romance Gallery on King Street. So we stop in front of it, and we've been, telling the story of the woman who's been in the hallways, but we didn't really have anything specific to talk about. So at the beginning, we noticed this phenomenon is when people were trying to take pictures of the house, their cameras would mess up in like strange ways. So it happens on all the guides' tours, and then we start communicating with like what's going on here. So like batteries are failing, but you walk away from the house and they come back. Cameras taking multiple pictures like 13 times when they only hit it once.
Yeah.
Mists, orbs, all that fun stuff. Zooming in by itself, just weird stuff. So we started talking about this on the tour, and one of the best moments ever, and I've had it happen multiple times, is when you warn people about it, and then it happens right in front of you, and everybody else is witnessing it.
Yeah.
If it doesn't happen, I look like a huge liar.
All 12 of us had no problem, Daniel. I know what you're saying. Yeah.
It's like those tomatoes start flying at me. But when
Why would they
it
come
does,
just to boo us? I
I don't mind it. I'll take it. But yeah, so that's definitely the most interesting of the phenomenons. But when it comes to haunted places, I mean, there's a lot of spots, but yeah, hands down, I mean, the Angel Inn is probably the most noted. The supposed spirit of Captain Colin Swayze and what he's caused over the years inside there.
What would people feel? Give us a ghost encounter. How would I know I've encountered a ghost outside of seeing something, like just seeing a figure? That's one way of knowing, right? Like you said, the story of the woman hovering over an open floor or something like that. What does a ghost encounter look like or feel like?
Well, people, they get scared because they think it's like the horror movies, like something's going to attack them or whatever. What I always tell folks, and in my experience, this is true, other people I've queried, is that in the moment you won't even know it's ghostly because the human mind is designed to try and rationalize what it looks at. So even if it's an unnatural thing you're looking at, like slightly unnatural, the mind will create an illusion that is natural because you'll immediately assume that's the case. For example, at the Hermitage, I saw two people in the field and didn't realize until afterwards that I couldn't see any faces or clothing. They were just shadows. But in the moment, I thought they were real. So that's why I tell folks, it's like, in the moment you won't know, but then afterwards you'll know and you'll be terrified.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's everybody, whether they want to admit it, you can be a super skeptic and not believe in ghosts. Everybody's had that kind of moment that's unexplainable. Nobody's going to believe this. And that's the other part of it too, right? Is that, I don't want to sound like a crazy person by saying I saw a ghost. And I'm saying that like with all due respect.
I've accepted I'm a crazy person. I'm cool with it.
With all due respect. Because I find myself sometimes I'm skeptical about whether or not, I feel these energies or something like that. But because it keeps going back to that point is that skepticism, people who don't believe and people who don't want to believe. There seems to be those weird little in-betweens of how do you fight that? The people who, I don't want to believe it. I'm too scared by this. Like, because there are those people too who just get terrified very easily.
You can't fight it. You can't fight it. I'll lean in to say you can be closed-minded as a non-believer and closed-minded as a believer. Best thing you can do is stick in the middle and just keep an open mind. But on a previous point, you mentioned about how do you know or you feel it. You'll know the first time it happens to you, and you'll remember that forever. So, like for me, going into the old Merritt House, then Yates Street, that's definitely up there, where you walk in and you could just kind of feel it vibrating around you, like it just feels different from outside. Like it could be calm, it could be restless. If you do experience the restless kind, which is where the poltergeists come from and the active hauntings, that's anxiety and dread inducing, then that's the one you'll never forget. So you'll know to expect it next time you go into another haunted place.
Okay, so to that point, poltergeists, hauntings, active hauntings is that what you called it? Or
Yeah, you could say active hauntings, or just a house that has the energy attached to it.
yeah, and that would be the negative, the anxiety inducing, I got to get out of here, there's something. And then there's the other one where it's just like, this woman's spirit has never left this house. You see her reflection in different places like that. Like how rewarding is it on a tour to have somebody experience something? And have you ever had that big moment where you've been giving that tour? You mentioned the house, but you've given that tour and they've seen something and get spooked out completely.
A few times.
Yeah.
And I love them. Well, I don't love them in the moment, but I love them afterwards.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is going to be great for marketing. But, I'll actually give you a recent example.
Yeah.
It wasn't this year. It was last Halloween, and I was doing a tour at the Hermitage. It was the last Saturday of October, right before Halloween. I don't know if you remember. It was unnaturally warm. There was a kind of like what it is
today,
right now. It's like it's so weird.
So today,
It's so weird.
No, I'm creeped out. I got goosebumps already.
I think I know where I'm going tonight. But anyway, I'm doing the tour, and throughout the entire night, just it felt off, and everybody was commenting. So I get to the back of the ruins where I tell the legend of William Black, and I'm talking, and there's forests in the back part of the ruins, and nothing back there. There's no pathway, so nobody can go back without hurting themselves. So I'm telling the story, and I hear this branches being broken in the woods behind the ruins. So I actually stopped talking. I didn't say anything to the group. I had like 30 people in front of me, and I just listened for a second. I heard it some more. So I was like, I shook it off and I kept going. And the minute I started talking, I hear a smash. Something had flown out from behind there and directly hit my lantern, knocking it over. So I jumped. I didn't scream, thankfully, otherwise I'd ruin my reputation. like the Ned Flanders scream. It was nothing like that. So I looked down and I picked my lantern up so there's no fire. I looked down and it was a half-eaten apple. Like it had no stem, so it couldn't have blown off from a tree. The only thing is if somebody actually whipped it and perfectly hit the lantern, and like there's nobody that can be back there. And I was like visibly disturbed for the rest of the tour.
Wow. You have your own podcast, Ghost Guy Daniel podcast. Your most recent episode, you mentioned Castle Kilbride. But I want to talk just real quick. You talked about the history of Dundas's Mrs. Crooks, the Hammer murder of 1924. I'm going to encourage everybody to check out the podcast, but give us a little bit of what we can expect on that podcast.
I personally love that story. It's not on the tour technically. It could always be added in later. But yeah, no, Martha Crooks. So she was the wife of Alexander. Alexander was the son of James. James was one of the original loyalists to this region.
Okay,
so there's a direct connection to like the pioneer family of the area.
Yeah.
Crooks Hollow, if anybody knows that, named after that family. So Alexander also had a father who was one of the folks, along with Egerton Ryerson, who established the education system. So the Crooks family is amazingly well known.
Yeah.
But Alexander, he just ran a hotel in Dundas. That was his only achievement. Not the best life. They lost their son. They ended up childless, and Martha ended up husbandless as well 2 years after he left the hotel. So she ends up going to Toronto, starting a woman's shelter. And that all leads up to, I believe it was 1924 in January, when they found her in the hallway of the woman's shelter on Jameson Avenue with her head smashed open. She had been murdered with a hammer. And in the end, they found the guy. He was just a career criminal named Harold Goddard. But he never got found guilty for her murder, even though it was pretty obvious. Yeah. Because the witness, it was deaf and mute. Yeah. So they couldn't trust that for whatever reason. He picked him out of a lineup, but that wasn't enough.
Wow.
But he got sent to Kingston Pen for an assault he did on another woman. But her murder became unsolved.
Putting together those podcasts, how long have you been doing those now?
That's been going almost 3 years now.
3 years, yeah.
Really enjoying it.
I was just about to say, like, that's got to be, like, it's like, I always say, like, you know, when we do, like, a news pack, it's like you're doing a presentation in front of the class. Like, that's what you get to do. You get to do all this research, and you get to present it in such a interesting and unique way. And I really appreciate you making the time today, because this is a great chat. I really appreciate it.
I was so happy to come. I really enjoyed this.
Yeah. Give us one quick spooky Hamilton. You mentioned Dundas, but real quick on Dundurn Castle. What's the spookiest thing about Dundurn Castle?
You want a story?
Sure.
We have time for a story?
Yeah, we got time for a story.
Good.
They were about to roll the credits. No, keep it going.
We got to listen. You got to listen. This is one of my favorites inside, because Dundurn Castle is not known for their ghost stories. So when something like this comes out, it's amazing. So this is during the Victorian Christmas tours years ago. Rare opportunity to be in the house at night before we showed up. So the guide was shutting down for the evening by herself, ends up on the second floor blowing out the candles, and from the end of a hallway leading to the sick room, she hears a woman's voice and a woman singing. She wasn't sure what it was, but she's scared. She hightails it from the house, comes back the next day. No source that could have caused it. So then you got to look into the history. As an investigator, you look at that, and finding out that one of the prominent energies in the house is Lady McNabb. This was Sir Alan's second wife, I believe, and she died of a lung disease. So if by chance she liked singing in life, what would she be doing after death? So like direct connection to history, vivid ghost story. It's one of my absolute favorites.
Wow, that's awesome. You can find out more on the tour. Where can people find more information about you, about the tours? Where can they book? Give us all the love.
The hub, it's everything. That's ghostwalks.com.
Ghostwalks.com. You find the podcast, and that's where you'll find Ghost Guide Daniel. Really appreciate it, especially today. I figured it'd be impossible to get the day before Halloween, but I'm glad we got you in here. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome.
Awesome. That is Ghost Guide Daniel, and my thanks to him for joining me today. And my thanks to you as well, because could not do the show without your support. Hey, while you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you. I want to thank Mike Corsten for directing today's show. And one more time, I want to thank you for listening. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Becko. Have a great day.